Imagine waiting 2 weeks to know if you got a like or not, or a thumbs up. In the decades before the internet, people made comics, and we reached out to each other. What was it like? This is the Sequential Artists Workshop, and these are the 90s mini comics oral history archives. Come join us as we take a longer look at those analog days when communication was a lot slower, maybe more deliberate, maybe more reckless. Who knows? It was just different. Join us as we take a look and really notice how much things have changed. Come join us on the socials. Sometimes it's Comics Workshop, sometimes it's Saw Comics. Either way, come check us out and welcome.
All right. So Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to talk with you and ask you these questions. To just kind of get going, get the ball rolling, for the intro, can you please state your name, the date, and where you're recording from?
All right. My name's Andrew Coltrin. It is August 1st, 2024, and I am recording from my home just outside of Milwaukee, Oregon.
Nice. And what are some of the comics publications that you created or maybe were a part of in the pre-internet era?
In the pre-internet era, yeah. I did some comics. Boy, I'm being slow now. No, I wanted to do comics. I created this Captain Nineball comic, which a friend of mine, we did this together. So it's basically, this was like a science fiction comedy thing. Like, let's make our own take on, Hitchhiker's Guide. And this, I realized like, oh, I need to learn how to draw. So I did some of that. And then also, it just kind of built from there. And then I discovered zines a little bit after starting mini comics. And then so I kind of was like, oh, I can do other things than just comics. And so I started going, like the Twilight zine was one of my little first more experimental collage and comics things. And I did a little experimental fiction piece about somebody suffering through 24 hours in taco hell. And so, yeah, it's always the combining images and words were always easier for me to get my point across. So it was,
Yeah.
Started out with a love of comics and then turned into like, oh, I can photocopy all kinds of stuff. But in my zines, I always include comics too. So.
Yeah. So sequential art and comics was always a medium that kind of spoke to you.
As soon as I sort of found them, I think, I grew up, with the newspaper at the table in the morning and started off reading the comics pages. And then when I was like in 5th or 6th grade, I found the comic book store and just really dived into all the things in the comic book world. And then by the time I got to high school, I started really getting into like the 90s alternative comic scene because I started my freshman year in high school was like 1989, so it was like the prime time to just get into like all the black and white cool stuff that was coming out of the independent comic scene. And
that's
trying to
awesome.
figure out how can I do that too, it like speaks in my language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So where all were you working from during the 80s and 90s?
Tucson, Arizona. That's where I grew up. So basically, I think, graduated high school in 1992 and I stayed in town and was trying to figure out how to, make comics and also like go to college and like there wasn't a degree for it there. So I went for creative writing, but then took a lot of art classes and and then just realized that, oh, I still need a day job, but that took me a long time to come to terms with that.
Yeah. So, and how would you describe your comics work back then?
Back then, I would describe it as naive and amateurish and a little surreal at times. there was definitely a progression. Like, I started coming, yeah, there was no like how to make comic books cuts. No, I take it back. There was actually a class like the community college offered like for um kids. Yeah, a drawing comic books class. And this guy, Jim Grote, who used to do like early they were kind of like furry comics, but it was just more like Conan the Barbarian parody where they're horses and stuff. But I guess he figured out a side hustle of teaching kids how to draw comics. So yeah, I got a little bit of a taste for that there, and then I think that's what like gave me the idea of like, oh, I could photocopy my own mini comics, and just go into the comic shops and go into used bookstores and basically trying to learn from other, comics artists. I got really into Cerebus, which was the Dave Sims epic 300 issue thing. I kind of got really out of it once I became very obvious to me the serious misogyny going on in it, and I was like, I don't know. Like, I like your artwork, I like your ideas, but yeah, so anyway. I found other artists. It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Evan Dorkin with the milk and cheese stuff. I've just loved that kind of anything that really made me feel like, oh, a person like me could make comics. Especially the Eddie Campbell, yeah, I did From Hell, but he also it was some of his like semi-autobiographical Alec comics really inspired me, and I sort of saw like how his process was very different from Dave Sims, who was like very like rigid in the, oh, this is the way the old-timey cartoonist did it, and I have to. And then he was like, well, I did a lot of this with ballpoint pen on typing paper, and then I read it, I cut out, and I was like, oh, you can just like collage and make stuff up and just go nuts. And I was like, that was more something I saw that I could do. So, so yeah, and I keep experimenting and on and off again over the years. I've the last the last few years I've gotten back to making comics again because I'd stopped for a while, and now I'm like, ooh, yeah.
Nice. So your love for it's kind of returned recently.
Yeah, I don't think the love ever went away. I just got
Mhm.
busy with stuff.
Yeah.
The first thing is like I had you know, became a parent, and then all of a sudden a lot of time went away because I
Yeah.
didn't know how to do that. And now I'm like much better at that. And
That seems to happen when you become a parent. That
I
time
become a parent, and now I'm
vanishes.
like, I've become a parent again, but I'm like determined, like, no, I can still draw.
Yeah.
I'm better at compartmentalizing my time now. So
Yeah.
it's,
Nice.
but yeah. But there was a while where I tried being a high school English teacher,
Mhm.
and that didn't work out for me so well. And then I figured out some other stuff. But somehow my drawings and stuff would always follow me around. So yeah, as a yeah. So it's something that always like just comes from inside. Like I have to draw this stuff. And for a while I would get really stressed out about it. Like, how do I turn it into a job? And now I'm like, well, I don't think you can. You just keep doing it. Some people turn it into a job, but you know,
Yeah.
but it's not the 1940s anymore. It's like got two different things.
Yeah.
But
You mentioned copying and
yeah,
learning that ballpoint pens and stuff like that, learning that you could do this kind of stuff. So that kind of leads us into the comics production aspect of the question.
right.
So can you tell us how you made your comics, what tools you used, etc.?
Um, yeah, okay. So I did a lot of different tools, like depending on different comics. Some of them were definitely stuff that I scribbled in my notebooks with, the pilot pen that I liked. And um, those are really down and dirty. I'm here, I'm in a college lecture, I'm dissociating a little bit, and let me like do my doodles to help focus. And so that was one way that I did that. But then there was other times where I like wanted to try to do like more like the formal, get it out the Bristol board and do the crow quills and the India ink. And so I did some of that too, trying, following the Dave Sim method, like, oh, that's how he did it. And, go to the art store and try different things. And then there was somebody, Joe Forkin, who had a comic in the weekly that was there. He was really into getting like the vellum kind of paper, putting it over the pencils, and then inking things with brush. And I was like, oh, I'll try that too. Yeah, so I tried a lot of different things, either using brush or using a pen, taking art classes and getting exposed to different media. And I realized the stuff that I always had more fun with would be the stuff that I let myself get experimental with.
Yeah.
And when I was like trying really hard to rigidly do this space opera, it was fun, but I don't know, sometimes more fun to just do a one pager where you're like, I'm going to start here and I don't know where I'm going to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
How do you ready your comics for print?
how did I ready them? Yeah, so all of my printing I did like basically at Kinko's on most of the time on their self-serve. So I'd have to yeah, a lot of them I would do, the 10 by 15 inches and I would reduce it down to fit on half of letter size paper and then have to go in and cut and paste the layout so that, yeah, all this stuff, doing all like the hands-on mathematics of making the page numbers be on the right pages. And like, so I'd have to like draw out these little notes like, okay, yeah, page one is on this side of it and the last page of the zine is on on that half, and then I've got to flip-flop them. And it was kind of rough back then because like now, like you can just tell the copier like, oh, this is the orientation I want you to print it in, and then it'll do everything for you. But back then, like I'd have to like alternate the directions of the pages if I
Mhm.
was going to print up a half letter size comic. And if I did it wrong, and then like, oh no, all the pages are upside down and whatever. It's just there were a lot of I was glad that like photocopies were like 3 cents back then for a
Yeah.
while. And then yeah, so there was room for error. And I know a lot of people would figure out ways to get free copies. And a friend of mine who also made comics, like we sort of um right, we met because we both like worked at the same movie theater, and he'd seen some of my zines, and then he was like mailing stuff to my PO box. And I didn't realize it was a guy I worked with for a while until I was like, this guy knows a lot about me. What's going on? And then I was like, oh, is he? So that was kind of my obliviousness. But no, it was my friend Vern, who's like really um yeah, he was doing stuff at the same time. And then he ended up quitting the movie theater and getting a job at Kinko's so that he could get free copies. And so I
Worked
changed
out.
things worked out. And then I'd be like, hey, copy this for me. Yeah.
So yeah, you kind of answered the next question, which was tell us how you printed them.
Oh, right.
Was there
Yeah.
any variation in that, or is
After like okay, in the 90s, at a certain point, I got to where I would do yeah, I would get the layout ready and I would actually be like feel like okay, I can turn it over to the people behind the counter and they can print it for me because I know I did it right.
Mhm.
And that made things a little bit easier, but then I would still like go through the steps of having to staple them all myself,
Yeah.
which yeah, boy, the stapling.
Do you
Yeah.
remember like an estimate of how many copies you printed of your first comic and how that
The
might have
first one
changed
is
over
like about
time?
30 copies. Yeah, really small. Like back then, yeah, I think like the biggest print run I ever did was about 100. So yeah, really small time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, our next section would be the noticing and awareness section. So, can you tell us about when you first saw evidence of people making their own comics? You kind of talked a little bit about that.
Yeah. Um, when I saw Evan, well, let's see. That really, I started making my own little mini comics basically because of that one, class that I took as a teenager. I was like, oh, I could do that. And then it was a question of what do I do with them, besides just hand them out to my friends. And then there was a little record store and I was not like a music guy, so I was just sort of oblivious, but another friend's like, oh yeah, you should check this out. And then I go in and there were some other local zines in there, and that's when I realized like, oh, this is a place for that. And yeah, and then yeah, that sort of fed the inspiration. So that was like before I met my friend Vern, I was like, yeah, yeah, I went to Toxic Ranch and I was like, oh, there's the other things. And like they probably had copies of Dishwasher and all the other like cool 90s zines. But I was like gravitated to the comic stuff. And
Yeah.
yeah, but I definitely saw that, oh, there was more people doing this kind of thing, and that, trading zines was a big thing. And then sometime not long after that, I yeah, found my first copy of Fact Sheet 5.
Yeah.
And then that was like an amazing publication that I don't know how they did that. Like how they managed to spend all the time. I think, yeah. And it was like the R. Seth Friedman era that I got into Fact Sheet 5. And yeah, I started subscribing up until like he burned out and was like, I can't do it anymore. And I was like, I don't know how you did it for this long. But basically, like he'd like write reviews of like every single zine that anybody would mail in, and yeah, have the contact information, and it was like your pre-internet database of who was making zines and how to contact them. And it was really um something that's been missed, I think.
Yeah.
Like nobody's figured out how to recreate that, even though there's been attempts, but you
Yeah.
know, it's a different world. But
Um,
yeah.
can you tell us a story of getting a comic that surprised or inspired you?
Look, getting a comic that surprised or um yeah, I think I would go back to yeah, the first time I picked up Eddie Campbell's Kitchen Graffiti, I think was the name of it. And it was, it was a different format than a regular comic book. I mean, it was printed, I'm not sure which publisher did that first edition. It's come out, a bunch of times, but it was, a different format, a different style, very, very raw in his illustration style. And that was pretty exciting to me. Um, just because I think I don't think I'd like thought of like an autobiographical context to comics before that. And then after that, I started making more autobiographical comics on my own, and feeling okay about like the drawings don't have to be perfect. Like your lettering style doesn't have to be like the same, you know, standard architectural lettering that shows up in the Spider-Man comics in the newspaper. You can have personal flair and personal identity. So yeah, I get that. That was probably like one of the biggest inspirations to like, oh, I can do other things and different things.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Um, so our next question you also kind of answered. The next question was, did you ever read an issue of Fact Sheet 5? Uh,
Oh yeah.
how would you say that like having that as like a resource impacted or inspired just comics work back then?
Um, yeah, no, it was a very Yeah, it was nothing like it at the time, or there's nothing like it now. Yeah, I really not only did I get exposed to other like comics artists, I found out, they just did every kind of zine, every kind of subculture, every kind of weird thing. So I would like go through it and just tangentially learn about things outside of my own experience, which was very for me, I was like, my kind of brain really likes to be able like, oh, there's this whole world, and like it's I can read it like three sentences at a time, and it doesn't so yeah, it really yeah, it was eye-opening, I think, consciousness expanding. But then also, at the time, yeah, there was like Too Much Coffee Man comics were, a common feature in Fact Sheet 5, and see Shannon Wheeler's early stuff, and that was pretty inspiring and inspired me to drink more coffee. I was like, yes, if I drink enough coffee, then I can be a comics artist. Or, just that kind of, a little bit off the wall, non-mainstream humor, um, you know, combining tropes of superhero comics with, you know, drinking a lot of coffee. It's like it's like, oh, cool. Uh, and yeah, I know I started trading zines with some people that I met through Fact Sheet 5, and that was it was interesting because like, I didn't know it at the time, but like I got diagnosed, about 13 years ago as being autistic, and I realized like, oh, this was like how I made social connections by printing these comics and stuff that explain stuff I have trouble doing with words. And then I found other people in Fact Sheet 5 that were interested in reading that kind of stuff. So yeah, I had a couple, yeah, a few different people that I would trade zines with, and it was just fun. And yeah, a lot of things happened just because I found this little key to unlock, social discourse with people. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, did you ever order a comic, or you kind of answered this as well? Did you
Oh
ever
boy.
order a comic or write to someone as a result of seeing it in Fact Sheet 5,
Oh, I sure
SPC?
did. Yeah, and I would be like, there's one comic I keep thinking about, which was super awesome, and I don't know what happened to my copy of it, but it was this comic called R2D2 is an indie rocker, and it was just like this weird fan fiction of like if R2D2 was in this indie rock band and they were going on tour, and I keep thinking about that, and I keep like, where did I put that? But you know, that was over 30 years ago, and I still remember
Yeah.
this. So these little things. So that was one I remember. Like, I ordered that through there, and yeah, a couple other things. Like there was a zine that was called "Have You Seen the Dog Lately," which was just a combination of slice of life and arty things that and we traded for a while, and it was fun. And yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever advertise in any of them, or was your work ever reviewed in it?
Oh yeah, I had several issues of the Twilight Zine were reviewed in Fact Sheet 5. So yeah, and I would get mail and orders every once in a while. It's sort of some of these people found me through Fact Sheet 5. I found some of them through that. And one of them, an interesting thing was like in the reviews you could say whether you sent things free to prisoners,
Mhm.
and I was like, I'll do that. And then I got some interesting letters from people in jail, and it's like, oh, okay. Um, but sort of related to that, yeah, I had an older cousin who she actually was doing some time in prison and almost done, and like she'd found my zines get reviewed in it was the little review zine from the local the record store, Toxic Ranch. But since she was connected to that, she thought, and And yeah, she sent me mail, friend. She's like, "Hey, you're making zines. That's pretty cool. How you been?" And that was good because that really like sparked that relationship again, which is like, I think at the time we were both like undiagnosed neurodivergent people having struggles in the world. So yeah, definitely. Yeah, through Fact Sheet 5 or through other review zines, just making connections in surprising ways, and like, yeah, having keeping up with some of them still. So that was fun.
Yeah. That kind of leads us right into our next section, which is on community. Can you tell us the story of how you met your closest friend or peer in comics?
My closest friend or peer in comics. That yeah, it's I don't know, like, should I stick with the 90s or like,
I mean, whatever works.
whatever works. I mean, yeah, because it's interesting because like a lot of the people that were doing stuff back then maybe aren't so much anymore, or it's been a while. But I know that, yeah, like my friend Vern, who worked at the movie theater with me, like he's somebody I'm still in contact with, and he used to make his zine called the Spleen Zine, and he would do yeah, his little comics of basically marijuana adventures of maybe based slightly on his real life. But then he his family was from Croatia. And then so in college he took a took a family visit to Croatia, and that changed his life and changed his focus. Is like, oh, I want to like devote myself to studying Croatian history because it was an amazing experience for him. And so now he is a professor at the university in Rijeka in Croatia, and he still does his weird art, and he'll like take every opportunity to get the university to fund him on a trip to go look at street art in places. So yeah, and he's somebody I'm still in contact with, and yeah, every once in a while we'll meet up and just doodle and draw comics, and sometimes they end up being published. Yeah, several years back, boy, now like early 2000s, I got together with him and another couple of friends and said, let's make this compilation zine about this stuff. And like I explained it to them and they didn't know what I was talking about, but they're like, sure, we'll like make submissions. So so yeah, so like basically anytime like I contact these people, pitch them a project, and they're like, yeah, sure. And then but now with the internet, it's a little bit easier because we can just scan an image and send it off. Like before, it was put it in the mail and trust the mail. And yeah, sadly, several months ago, my friend Vern did send me, he's like, oh, I found these cool zines, and he mailed them to me. And in my, I checked my mail, and what I got was uh an empty envelope that had torn open on one side. And I was like, oh, dude. And he's like, oh, that's so cool. So yeah. I'm like, oh. The mail is risky, but
Yeah. Can you tell us about the first show or con experience or situation where there were other people doing what you did?
okay. Yeah. So the first the first one was the first Portland zine symposium. It was in it was I'm like trying to remember. That was 2001, I think. Yeah, it was. Yeah, the summer of 2001. Right. Back when, yeah, pre 9/11, just barely. But that's right. Yeah, I think it was 2000, 2001. Yeah, but for that one, we just happened to be in downtown Portland at the same time because there was also the Hip Mama conference was going on the same weekend, and they're both happening at PSU. And I was like, oh, while we're doing this, let's go see, because it'd become a parent, had a baby, and we're like, oh, we'll hang out with these alternative parenting people. And then we're like, oh, and then the zine symposium's over here. And then I go and wander through, and I was like, I could make zines again, because it hadn't been that long that I'd sort of taken a break. And then the next year I tabled at the second Portland Zine Symposium, and that was pretty fun. I've just being able to have a spot and say, okay, here's my stuff, this is what I do, and being able to talk to people and show it off. And it was, yeah, I was
Yeah.
inspiring. It added some more juice, and I think that's what sparked me to like start making zines more often again. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
can you tell us when you felt the most connected to the community, or the least connected, or both?
Hmm. Most connected, least connected, both. Um, you know, I feel like I'm getting more and more connected with the community. Like, I keep going to zine shows like lately, the last few years. I think, yeah, post COVID, I was like, no, we got to go out and do things. And so I think I've been doing more work just knowing myself and knowing how important it is to make connections, to be able, because I realized, oh, that's how I did things when I was younger. Like I was kludging through, uh, you know, naively trying to figure out my brain differences that I didn't really understand and didn't have language for. And now I'm like, oh, there are lots of neurodivergent people and all kinds of just very diverse people doing zines. And for the most part, I'd say most of them are really ready to listen to other perspectives and share their cool stuff. So yeah, as I've been going to more a little like comic shows and zine shows, yeah, I'm meeting more people and making that first step. And it's like, hey, what kind of stuff are you doing? And that, oh, that's cool. And like just trying to like ping them on Instagram and just like make sure that there's still like a little bit of yeah, a connection. So and then it's kind of cool because like a couple of them will like reach out and ask me questions sometimes, like, oh, do you think about, what do you think about such and such a publisher, or, things like that. And I'm like, well, like I'm friends with them, they're cool. Like,
Yeah.
and then like another thing is like you know I've become pretty good friends with the Joe Beal from Microcosm Publishing. So that's because he's in Portland too. And yeah, I know one of his things, like he started like writing about his autism, and I was like, oh, me too. And like so now, yeah, once a month we hang out and just talk for 4 hours about whatever. And so it's pretty good. Like I think, yeah, I'm like more and more involved with the community in my own way. But yeah.
Yeah. Uh, who would you say were slash are your most significant peers in comics that come to mind?
Most significant peers. Man, there's people that I just really like their work. Like right now, Farrell Dalrymple, who does like the yeah, Pop Gun War and the Wrenchies, and is working on Robot Todd right now. I just really dig his stuff. And like we've interacted a few times. He's a really nice guy, and like he's even like, it seemed really talked up my little mini comics on his Patreon and stuff, and I'm like, oh, cool. So yeah, I'll go with him right now. But yeah, it changed. Like, it seems like everybody that I make an effort to like, talk to, have an exchange with, um, it has this potential to lead to some really positive stuff. It's like there's just a lot of really, everybody knows like, yeah, we're doing it for the love of it, and there's no need to like there's no need to get nasty about stuff. Like that's the thing. It's like everybody's really cool and ready to hang out and talk.
Yeah.
And I know there's like I live in Portland, so there's a little, we're just outside of Portland. So there is like this big community of people doing comic stuff and like zine meetups and let's go over here and draw. And like I wish I could do more of that, but also like I'm a I'm a oh well, I'm at home for the day now kind of person. No, it gets
Yeah.
like anything that starts like after 8 o'clock, I'm like, oh, I don't know. But I love that it's there. So every
Yeah.
once in a while I get out and yeah.
Um, did you ever do like collaborations or like draw jams with your peers?
Oh yeah. Yeah, like I say, my friend Vern is like so um big at instigating that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
So yeah, like whenever he's in town, he's like, "Hey, let's go meet up and draw." And so yeah, definitely doing that. And we've done different variations of like either in person or through the mail. And we're probably, after this, I'll probably like shoot him an email saying, "Hey, let's draw something," and we'll probably figure something out.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely that I would do that kind of thing. Collaborating. Um, I am interested in doing like more. Yeah, I have this in my mind. Like I want to do like a compilation comic, but I have to figure out how to pitch it. And because I think, well, I think it'd be fun to do that, but like I'm also doing a million other things. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I've really, yeah, grown to appreciate like the collaborative process. And
Mhm.
actually, yesterday I have a young friend. Well, he's 7 years old, and he's a lot like me. And we're talking about, oh, we need to like make a book sometime. And so yesterday we did a drawing jam. So
Mhm.
we're coming up with a cool little story about a leprechaun and the Easter bunny, and he can't find his pot of gold. And I'm like, yeah, so yeah, I jam with kids. Pretty fun.
Um, so the last question for the community section is how would you say that your community and peers have affected your own work?
Um, You know, knowing that there's somebody interested in seeing what you're going to do next
Mhm.
really helps you be able to do the next thing. So, yeah, um, yeah, there is that like sort of that resistance to get started on something or imposter syndrome or that the treacherous perfectionism that makes it but then when you're like, well, but so and so I'm gonna meet up with Joe's weekend, and it'd be cool if I had a comic to show him. It's,
Yeah.
and yeah, so definitely that having people outside of your own head to you know bounce ideas off of and share things with really, I think helps, especially like you have a conversation with someone or, you know, just Instagram comments or whatever, and you're like, oh wow, that's neat how you did that. And all that that interactivity really helps spark the next idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so much better than like that's one thing about being in the 90s and being relying on the mail is that you're just like stuck in your own room for a long time and you don't know. And now because there's more opportunities to get more immediate connection, it's like, oh, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
it helps get things moving faster. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, that brings us to our next section, which is on distribution. Can you tell us how you traded or sold your comics?
All right. Back in the 90s, it was basically, go to the comic shop or the record store, and a lot of them, yeah, it was mostly on consignment. And so then you have to remember to go back after certain months, check on sales and see what happens. So that was, yeah, back then, that was a lot of what I did. And um now I still, like with my new stuff, I'll still do that. There's a couple of comic book stores that I'll go and hit around town. Like I'm gonna have to give Floating World Comics a shout out because they're like really good about um carrying local comics people's stuff. They have a lot. They're just a really, really cool store. If anybody comes to Portland, Floating World's a place to go. But also, yeah, it's my newer zines, like Microcosm Publishing does distro them. So that makes it a little bit, yeah, I don't have to do as much work. I mean, I also have like, an Etsy shop, but that's kind of every once in a while something comes through and then it gets to be a pain. So if like it's over $10, then you have to have trackable shipping, and it's like, some of the things I had on my Etsy shop were just stickers, and somebody bought over $10 of stickers, and I was like, oh, I can mail this for like 2 stamps, but Etsy won't let me. Like,
Yeah.
okay. I mean, I don't know. They provide a service, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's nicer when it's like, oh, someone else does the distribution and they have a network and it works. And I just like to draw the stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, can you tell us about, you've mentioned a couple already, but can you tell us about some of the other comics that you remember from that time?
Okay, from back then, yeah. Oh, okay. Well, let me see. I'll go. Yeah, there was these couple guys in town, Chris Silla and Greg Pettix, who did this weird comic in the college newspaper called Swank. Uh, that was uh I know that Chris is like yeah, he's got a book coming out with from Fantagraphics soon, so I think he's like actual a comics person, but I'm like, oh yeah, that was cool back then, and I'm like, it's probably still weird now, but let's see who else. Just the local. Well, actually, I'm gonna have to shout out uh John Proudstar,
Mhm.
who like I knew him growing up. He's from Tucson, and he's like an actor, but he's always been like a comic book guy. Like he's probably like the reason that I got into the X-Men, because I went to school with his younger brother, but so his younger brother came to school with talking about the X-Men, and I'm like, all right, and I guess I'm gonna learn about superhero comics now, because I was more of like a manga kid before that, and then I was like, okay, fine. I got friends now. We're gonna read X-Men. But I know that John Proudstar, like he's had a couple issues of the newest iteration of his Tribal Force comic, which he keeps trying to bring out, and that's super indie. I'm not sure how his distribution works, but like he'll do like crowdfunding
Yeah.
stuff for the issue. So but it's cool that he keeps doing that. And so I mean, so that's something that he was talking about way back then, and then slowly but surely, you know, so that's a passion project of his that he slowly gets out. Um, let's see, other indie comic stuff. Oh, Dame Darcy sent me a nice postcard once from the Meat Cake Comics.
Mhm.
And, yeah, I was like all into the yeah, I like Devin Dorkin's stuff. I really liked. I mean, yeah, his Eltingville comics were fun, and oh yeah, he did like a jam like collective comic called Instant Piano that like Dark Horse published, and there was like I think there's Kyle Baker and a few other artists, and they all contributed stories to this like big fat thing that would come out every few months, and just went everywhere, all over the place. which like really spoke to me about, it's like, oh, I can be everywhere and all over the place. I have trouble with focus. This is great.
Yeah.
I mean, but that's the thing. Like, man, there were a lot of slave labor titles that I used to like be into, and I'm like, what were they back then? Of course, I was into the Ninja Turtles before anybody else was. It's like before they sold out, you know. Which is like a ridiculous like 90s perspective to be like worried about things selling out when you're like, no, they made the right choice. Yeah. I don't think
Um,
this, yeah, started the Ninja Turtles with artistic integrity in mind. They were just goofing around. But yeah.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
Um, you've also mentioned a couple of these as well, but did you feel connected to particular stores or venues that supported you and your community?
Oh yeah. I did. I mean, I would say specifically in the 90s in Tucson, there was the store called Captain Spiffy's Superhero Emporium, which sadly it's no longer there. You know, it's it's the story of retail. But yeah, that store was basically my second home a lot of the times because it was really close to the university campus. And I would just go there and hang out between classes or, you know, talk to Nate, the guy behind the counter, and um run out my credit cards. It was great. But yeah, it was that particular store was sort of a focal point of like, you know, that was a store that was the most welcoming to independent artists. And yeah, it was yeah, so I have fond memories of them. And like currently, you know, I live in Portland, and there's more cool comic book stores here than I can keep track of. You know,
Mhm.
like I mentioned Floating World, which is really great, and then there's Books with Pictures is another just really cool store, and Cosmic Monkey. Yeah. And I know I'm leaving out a bunch too because they're all over the place. But yeah.
All right, cool. So let's see. Were you ever part of any kind of distribution collective like Puppy Toss, or did you submit to small distributors like Fandom House or Spit and a Half?
Oh boy. I didn't, not back in the day. Like I wasn't that organized. I'm like, I think I barely recognize those names. And yeah, Phantom House. Yeah, I remember it existed, but I didn't really do anything with them. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. If you were involved in distribution, tell us how you found and chose what to distribute.
Okay. Yeah. I was
Nope.
I wasn't.
All
That
right.
wasn't my strength, but yeah.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, that'll move us on to our last section, which is kind of a wrap up. What do you miss about that time?
Um, I miss that yeah. Everything was cheaper. I missed that. It's like, it's crazy now, but let me see. What else do I miss about? Yeah, I did have some like 90s nostalgia for a while, and then now I'm like, you know, I'm pretty happy with, well, yeah, I live where I am. Yeah, you can't go back. But I would say that, yeah, Fact Sheet 5 in itself was just an institution that it just amazes me that it happened. I don't know. I think I miss the I miss the fact that there weren't drive-through coffee shops. I think like yeah, the pre-Starbucks world was a little bit different pace. Let's see. The thrill of getting something in your PO box when you go and check it was pretty fun. But um Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might be about it.
What do you not miss about that time?
What do I not miss? Hmm, what don't I miss about that time? Um, I don't miss. I would say I don't miss having to do the layout on paper and then try to feed that. I don't miss all the cutting and the glue. Like I'm I think it's really neat I can do it on my computer now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially since like I would do a lot of like yeah, try to do, play with the photocopiers and do things like get a negative image or do a transparency or do it like let me try. I mean, it was fun, but it was like a lot of rigmarole to go into the photocopy place and like do all these things for a couple hours and then put most of it in the recycling bin because it wasn't right. And then
Yeah.
now I'm like, okay, I can just mess with it on my computer till it's right. Yeah.
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 And as we're kind of winding down, you're welcome to smother us with more anecdotes. Tell us one more memory you've got.
One more memory. Um, it's a sad memory. No. No, okay. Well, it's because of yeah, my crippling social anxiety. But yeah, there was one time I made up a mini comic and I went to Comic-Con and I had my backpack full of these things. And I think I gave it to like three people. I was like, I didn't know how it was overwhelming. Yeah, and this was back when Comic-Con was not what it is now. I mean, it was still kind of a big deal, but it was like it was right when the Hollywood stuff was starting to move in there, and then, but it was still like, yeah, mostly, yeah, comic book collectors and comic book artists at their little tables in the convention hall. Um, but yeah, I would say I did that. I tried, and for some reason, like I didn't know myself well enough to understand why can't I just get over this barrier of saying, "Hey, I got this comic. You want to trade?"
Yeah.
Um, so I guess that's my advice to younger people is like, don't be afraid to say that.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to, yeah. Don't just, yeah. Showing up at the place is easy, but then like, just take that next step and it'll be all right.
Yeah.
Because the people are nice for the most part. You meet some cool people. Yeah.
All right. And then our final question is just tell us three people from the top of your mind that we should contact for these archives.
Okay. Well, I keep mentioning my friend Vern. Yeah, or Vyarin Pavlakovich. I think I gave you his email already. We'll
Mhm.
see. But like I said, he's also world traveler. So let's see. That's one. Oh, I can't remember his name. Hmm. It might come back. Um, let's see if you want to like get more of the distro angle, like Joe Beal might be a good person to talk to because he's figured that out. Let's see, and oh my gosh, let me turn around and look at my comic book shelf and I remember. Right. Steve Laffler, that's who it is. Steve Laffler, who did the Bug House comics, and yeah, he still makes comics, but he was doing stuff back then. And yeah, he'd be probably a cool person to talk to.
All right.
He's been nice to me on the internet, so yeah.
All right. Well, awesome. This has been really informative. I think this went really well.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
Yeah, thank you so much for talking with us,
sure.
giving us your story. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right, yeah, and if you need anything else, yeah, just shoot me an email
Yeah.
or
So
all
we'll
right.
go ahead and end our interview there. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And thank you to everyone for watching. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. This has been a production of the Sequential Artists Workshop, or SAW. You can find us on social media at Comics Workshop and online at sawcomics.org. You can hear about our many courses at learn.sawcomics.org. SAW is a nonprofit and supported by people like you. Learn how to make a tax-deductible donation at the donate page of sawcomics.org. You can join our free community of comics explorers at members.sawcomics.org. Thanks so much for being here.